Hey, folks, we're back. It's another episode of the Processing Blue podcast, joined by fellow Panthers beat reporter Alex Zietlow. I am another Panthers beat writer, Mike Kaye. We are in the early days of the official offseason. The Super Bowl's done. The Pro Bowl games were whatever. And Alex Zietlow and I are on your screen or in your ears right now. And speaking of that, Alex, how you doing after a week of NASCAR coverage?
Yeah, no, I'm good, man. I spent the week in Daytona Beach, Florida, your stomping grounds. Also, I realized this in talking to my.
Did Daytona like once in my entire life, but thank you.
Well, no, that's actually real funny. So we had this meeting prior to the podcast, and we were just like planning the off season, the rest of the off season, whatever. And Mike, you've lived in like the most eccentric parts of America. Like you grew up in New Jersey. That's cool. Then you spent time in Florida, Arizona, and now you're in North Carolina. I don't know of many people who have that like background. Like, okay, I'm gonna try out the Northeast. Okay, I'll try out the South. Okay, I'll try out the West. But like, you did it in strange states. Not, I don't mean to be going at those states. I love those states. Heck, North Carolina is my home. But I'm just saying, it's an eclectic mix of places in America.
Well, I always tell young folks in this business that like you should go out and be in a place where you're not comfortable in and that you're not used to kind of find yourself, find your voice as a writer, find your voice as a storyteller. And for me, that was Arizona. And then came back to Jacksonville where I went to college, covered the Jaguars, and then went to Philly and now I'm here, and I love Charlotte. I love that it's brought me here. But anyway, you know what I also love?
What do you also?
We don't have to talk about the franchise tag, which the window opened on Tuesday as we're recording because JJ Jansen has re-signed. I mean, there's literally no reason to talk about the franchise tag anymore. JJ Jansen re-signed to a one-year deal last week. That's really why, we said we wanted to, during the offseason, do these podcasts around major events. Well, clearly, the record breaker signing a deal. We joke a lot about JJ in a fun way. That's the only point I have on that. That's the end of that sentence.
Just one thing about JJ, though. According to your Twitter, the Panthers re-signing JJ was equal to the city of Philadelphia earning a Super Bowl. Care to comment?
I mean, that's basically, who needs a parade? Along with JJ, the Panthers also signed Matthew Wright, a kicker who's been here a couple of times, mostly when Eddie Pinheiro has been injured, to a future reserve deal. So the specialists are kind of getting taken care of. Those are typically the easier deals to figure out. JJ is probably going to sign 1-year deals until he decides to retire. I'll just say this. I think a lot of him as a person and as a player, and I think he's very good for the locker room. I think he's good for the organization. He's become a player historian of sorts. I mean, remember, this guy has played with like Jeremy Shockey, John Beeson, Muhsin Muhammad, and then he's also played with the likes of like DiCaprio Boodle. I mean, like he has really bridged the gap of this organization franchise history wise. And I think he's important because I think he gets it on so many different levels. And I think you want people in your organization that truly want to be there. If there is a person that truly wants to be in Carolina, it is JJ Jansen. Alex, you got some thoughts on JJ re-sign?
Well, your point is reminding me of Cam Newton's comments a couple weeks ago. At this point, JJ was in the locker room that Cam called, in 2010, like he was stepping into a locker room that needed to shed this losing mentality and needed to win. Isn't that remarkable? Like just the days of Cam Newton seem so far away for this franchise at this point. And we kind of treat like the Steve Smith years and the Cam Newton years as this bygone product. And JJ Jansen was there. I mean, beyond humorous, it is remarkable, as you were saying. That's all I wanted to
Well, but like think about it this way. JJ Jansen played through Luke Kuechly's entire career. He saw his entire career up close. He saw Greg Olson's entire Carolina Panthers tenure. He saw most of Brian Khalil's. He saw, all of Christian McCaffrey's Carolina. Like it, he is kind of, you know, one of those guys that's lived through, we talk about generations being 10 to 20 years in life, but like generations in the NFL are typically 4 to 5 years. He's really been through several iterations and several coaches. He's worked with John Fox. He's worked with Ron Rivera. He's worked with Matt Rule. He's worked with Frank Reich. He's worked with Dave Canales. So it's a pretty impressive thing that he's constantly retained, and I think it speaks to his character and his performance. We talk a lot about this, but he hasn't really had a bad snap in the last decade or so, and I think that speaks to his consistency. Let's get into Wright a little bit, because I've alluded to this before. I do not think Eddie Pinheiro will be back. I think he will definitely be able to test free agency. I think there will be some sort of market for him. I would not be shocked if he signs a 1-year deal off this season. It was an up and down year, especially down the stretch. I just think like the proof is in the pudding. Like they did not attempt a lot of long shots throughout his entire tenure here. He was here for 3 years, and I can think of how many 50-plus yard field goals he attempted, off the top of my head, is probably a little bit over a handful. And so I think you want somebody who's a little bit more consistent. I think if Matthew Wright is the starter, I think is the kicker coming out of training camp, either something went really, really wrong or he had the camp of his life. I mean, his numbers are good, but there's a reason why he's bounced around as much as he has. I believe they'll bring in a rookie to compete with him. Wright's basically on a minimum deal. And so you bring in a rookie to compete. And so that'll be a fun part of training camp to cover. We haven't really, the Harrison Mevis competition really wasn't a competition. There were 2 guys at the Shrine game that I was really impressed by, Ben Sauls from Pittsburgh and Andres Barragolis from Miami. I would pay attention to the latter. If it comes to undrafted free agency or late in the draft, we'll see if they're willing to spend a draft pick on a kicker. But like, sorry, go ahead.
And you would pay attention to the latter because Dan Morgan's also from the U.
But also because Darren Bates was able to work with him.
Okay, yeah.
Brian, he's pretty well regarded. He's one of the best kickers in the country. So Sauls, though, is really interesting because he's got a long history of hitting from deep. He was invited to the combine. A couple of years ago, the NFL decided to make the combine less specialist oriented, in that they were only inviting a few guys to go, and then they would have a separate specialist combine during the week for the special teams coordinators so they could focus on those guys. But Sauls is one of those guys. He can hit from deep, and he played in literally the worst place you can kick. Like, I've always been told that Buffalo and Pittsburgh are absolutely the worst places to kick, and he was able to do it throughout his tenure in college. Moving on, let's get into some more Panthers stuff, because while JJ's coming back and Matthew Wright's a familiar face, there's been some movement on the coaching staff. We've reported a few of them. I won't go down the list, but there's the coaching staff hasn't been officially announced as of Tuesday, but we have what has been reported, what we've reported ourselves. And, there's going to be a new outside linebackers coach. Ronaldo Hill, a former defensive coordinator, is going to join the staff in some capacity. They're bringing in Kevin Peterson, who played for Evero with the Rams. He's worked with DBs at the college level. They're bringing in an offensive assistant who's coming from the coach factory that is John Carroll. So there's some interesting buzz there. Let's kind of get into it. When you look at the list of reported expected hires, who really stands out to you, Alex?
Well, you mentioned him. I think that Ronaldo Hill is like a really compelling hire for this defense. He's, as you said, he's the former defensive coordinator for the Chargers. He was a defensive backs coach before that, a former safety as a player.
He was fun as a player. Really fun.
Yeah. So that's great. He it's as you said, and as Mike Kaye has reported. I don't know why I just refer to you in the third person, but maybe it's because all these, like, whenever I do a radio interview, I say you.
There's
Anyway,
a lot of names, you know. It's okay.
um, as you've reported, he hasn't been like named specifically to like a particular spot, but with Burt Watts, the safeties coach, getting let go this past offseason, I think it would make a lot of sense for him to be the safeties guy. And the safety room, although it's a little bit more secure than the rest of the defensive backfield, it's going to be up in the air this offseason as well with the rest of the defense. So him coming in would kind of represent a fresh start with that safeties room if it aligns that way. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, and before we move on, I would also say there's a chance that he could be named DB's coach, just because remember Jonathan Cooley has the title of defensive passing game coordinator, because he kind of oversees the defensive backs. As we reported, D'Angelo Hall is no longer part of the staff as well, so that leaves stuff open. It would not surprise me if Kevin Peterson joins the team as a defensive. Well, as I've reported, he's joined as a defensive assistant. So with that said, it's different than D'Angelo Hall's assistant DB's coach. So it wouldn't be surprising if Hill kind of merged the safeties and the assistant DB's coach roles together. To me, AC Carter, the new outside linebackers coach, is really interesting. I've talked to a few people that have worked with him who have called him dynamic. They said that he is really adaptable. He's really forward thinking. I think that's really interesting. Obviously, Tim Lakabu was let go. He actually had a background more as an inside linebackers coach, which is what he'll basically be in Jacksonville. He just picked up a new job. I think this outside linebackers group needed some more development, needed some more youthful energy potentially. The go-getter mindset is something that Dave Canales really harps on, and I'm sure that AC Carter kind of fills that role. AC Carter coached under Evero in Denver as a defensive quality control coach. He spent the last 2 years working with the defensive line with the Rams, and they just produced the defensive rookie of the year in Jared Verst. They also had Braden Fisk, excuse me. Those two guys developed really well under him, or partially under him. And I think that it's really interesting because as a source I spoke to mentioned, the outside linebackers in this scheme are essentially defensive line players. And so it'll be interesting to see how Carter kind of adjusts with the run game. That's where the edge group really needs to get better. Obviously, they need to produce sacks, but everybody needs to do better from a run fit standpoint. I'm interested to see how Carter and Wash kind of work together. Getting into that, the combine is coming up, as we mentioned. It's going to be next week. Alex and I will both be there. We'll do a podcast from there next Tuesday that'll hit your earbuds on Wednesday, kind of previewing the whole thing. And we'll reflect on Dave Canales and Dan Morgan when they speak. I think, the importance of the combine, while we get into this underwear Olympic sort of stuff, some of these drills are, easy to line up with tape. Some of them aren't. Some of them are kind of antiquated. To me, the 3-cone drill has always been the most important drill, and they don't even show it on TV. It's really indicative of pass rusher bend, wide receiver bend, cornerback bend. That's what I'd be paying attention to numbers wise. The problem is a lot of players don't want to screw it up, so they do it more at their pro day than the combine. So that's worth mentioning. Offensive and defensive linemen, you want to see the strength of the bench press, but really the combine's important for a few other reasons that we don't see. One, these interviews are really important. You see all the quarterback interviews that people play, but they go beyond the quarterback position. You get a feel for the person. You put them through some tape training, stuff like that. You get to know that guy. It's also extremely important from a medical standpoint. A lot of these guys are, because of the COVID year, are older and have seen a lot of stuff. Some of them have had multiple redshirt years. You want to get information on their injuries. Obviously, we know about Jonathan Brooks, and, they're bringing in a new strength and conditioning staff. It'll be interesting to see how they handle injuries and players coming off injuries this year. And listen, I think it's important also for the front office to get in front of agents where they can negotiate contracts to re-sign players to, you know, just because JJ's out of the way. I mean, that's the big one, obviously. There are guys like Andy Dalton, who I wrote about. I did a deep dive analysis in the pros and cons of re-signing Andy Dalton, um, which I am very much for. I think there's a lot of logic there, but if you want to read about it, go to the charlotteobserver.com or charlotteobserver.com. You don't need the. But Mike Jackson's a guy who, to me, is very interesting because this cornerback free agent class is brutal. And I think if the Panthers really want to get him back, they probably have to sign him before free agency, just because I think he will get an inflated number otherwise. But also remember, he's 28 and coming off his best season. He's mostly been kind of like a nomad player otherwise. But then you've got guys like Shaq Thompson to finalize what's going on there. You've got guys like Shai Tuttle and Miles Sanders who seem very, very, very clear pay cut or bust sort of conversations. Jadeveon Clowney has talked about an extension before. I mean, we've also alluded to potentially Adam Thielen maybe getting a rework deal. I think there's opportunities there for, Brett Tillis and Dan Morgan to get in front of people that are important and kind of shake things out ahead of free agency and know what your plan is. So what are you most looking forward to? This is going to be your second combine. What are you going to be looking for in general?
I'm looking forward to the brain-splittingly hot shrimp cocktails at St. Elmo's. Is it Elmo's or St. Elmo's?
St. Elmo's.
Okay. Yeah. My bad. I'm still a relative rookie at this. No, but beyond that, I'm looking forward to, I mean, you hit on a lot of things. I think it is cool to see guys from Charlotte or guys with Carolina ties spread their wings at the combine. For a lot of the players that we talk to, beyond the guys who are going to be a day 1 or day 2 pick, like these guys who are going to be day 3 picks, this is their chance. This is their Super Bowl, and I find that really quite cool to learn their stories and to write about them and things. 3 local guys that I'm looking at, I've written about them a ton on the newsletter, and I've talked to you about him a lot. James Pierce Jr., he is an edge rusher out of Chambers High School in Charlotte. Would love to learn more about him. A lot of people say he's not going to be a great run stopper because he's kind of on the slimmer side and all these things. I think that is a bit blown out of proportion, but I'll leave that.
He is very svelte. There's no question about it.
Yeah, he's 6'5" and 243. But he's got a wingspan like a hooper dog. I really like that about him. I mean, people talk about his technique not necessarily being there. I mean, and obviously the tape that I'm watching is him making plays, but I'm just really impressed by him. Anyway, we can talk about him more on as we go on. But other local guys, you got Power Eccles, a linebacker out of UNC. He's probably going to be a day 3 pick because he too is also kind of smaller for a linebacker. He's 6 foot 225, but he's also coming off his worst year in college football. In 2022 and 2023, he had over 100 tackles. This past year, he only had 76. UNC had a really bad defense. That's why they went out and got Bill Belichick, or among the reasons why they went out and got Bill Belichick. So I don't know. I think he could be an interesting prospect coming out of the Tar Heel State. And then, you got other guys, Bryson Nesbitt among them,
It's champions, bro.
Yeah. Well, whoever Mike wants to talk about. But that's what I'm looking forward to in the combine, is meeting these guys and talking to them and learning their stories.
So. Yeah, I think we get kind of lost in the sauce of the business here, but there are a lot of guys who have had interesting paths to get to where they are. And I think, one thing that I enjoy doing, especially when I was younger in the business, is every once in a while, you'll see a guy sitting at a podium, just kind of and nobody's talking to him. And I love going up to a guy and just chatting one-on-one, kind of getting to know them. I mean, the guy might go undrafted or he might end up at the team you cover, but he's a person. He's got probably an interesting path. If you got to the NFL, there's something to be said, and so I think that's kind of a compelling thing. But one interesting thing as a beat reporter is typically during the combine, the GM and head coach speak. And this will be when Dave Canales ultimately speaks, will be the first time that he has spoken since cleanout day. And, obviously there have been changes to the staff. The team re-signed JJ Jansen. There are bits only get old because they're good. They, they do have a lot of needs on offense. They also have a lot of needs on defense. He stuck to his word that Ebro is going to return. And I think, it's important to get his perspective. He's not gonna be an open book, but I do think, following up with him, like you wrote the story about how he didn't want to fix Bryce Young last year. Well, guess what? It seems like he fixed Bryce Young. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what tidbits we can glean from there. Sometimes you kind of have to read between the lines. But what are you interested to talk to Dave about as we get this opportunity to kind of figure out what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, he's not going to break substantial news.
No, he will not.
Even saying something to the effect of, we're not trying to fix Bryce Young, or whatever the exact wording was, that wasn't like big news. It became big news because, all the aggregators got to it. But he was basically just saying, no, I believe in my franchise quarterback. And then, of course, 2 weeks into the season, he benches him and then blah, blah, blah. But then he like rehabilitates him and Bryce is great. All right, whatever. So keeping in mind they might not like shatter our worldviews, our paradigms in this thing. I think the most interesting thing is to get his perspective on this receiving core, because this is kind of the most compelling thing in the Panthers offseason right now. What is going to be required for Bryce to take that next step, which is to look like a starting quarterback for 17 games in the season? Is Xavier Legette the guy that they invested a first-round draft pick in? Somehow getting him to shed perspective on Xavier would be nice. Can he play the X position? Is he agile enough? Is he reliable enough? Also, I'd love to hear, has it been reported anywhere that X got surgery on his wrist? That was a thing that he said would probably happen at some point. I haven't heard anything about it, if so. Do they add a receiver in free agency? It's not going to be T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a pipe dream. It's probably not going to be Cooper Kupp. I was on the radio the other day and they were like, yo, we heard that Cooper Kupp is slated as a best fit for the Panthers. And I was like, oh, really? I don't know how exactly that's possible. The Panthers I just checked Over the Cap this morning, $16.9 million in salary cap space, according to Over the Cap. And it's a projection. That's 20th out of 32 teams. 20th. So who is realistic that the Panthers could bring in wide receiver if you're going to try to go the free agent route? Is it going to be an older guy like Tyler Boyd, who's 30, coming off a rough season with the Titans? Is it going to be Robert Woods, who's 32? Is it going to be Deontay Johnson? I'm kidding. It's not going to be Deontay Johnson. But is it going to be Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who's also 30? I am actually kind of intrigued by this free agent option. He had 411 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was on 2 teams this past year, got kind of lost in the sauce in Buffalo with all their receiving talent, then went to New Orleans and had a really good start to his tenure in New Orleans. I think he could be interesting. Tutu Atwell was this guy that you wrote about, Mike. I think he could be interesting too, if for no other reason than the fact he's 25 and he played kind of a lot in the Rams offense, which had Cooper Kupp and Puka when they were both healthy. So they're free agent options. I know I'm rambling. Or do you just go into the NFL draft and you draft a wide receiver? I want to know what Dave's plan is for this receiving room. And because I think I think that's the best access point. Do you agree with that? Do you think that they should focus on elsewhere? What's your thinking in all this?
Well, I don't think he's going to tell us what the plan is. Um, but what I would say is, yeah, I wouldn't. Cooper Cup's not really I wouldn't. Like if you said DK Metcalf, I would say maybe. I just think their cap situation isn't as glowing as some perceive it to be. They, like you said, they can do a lot of maneuvering. I don't think they will. I think they're going to take their medicine for a second year in a row. And while that sounds detrimental, the expectation should be that they're going to make a push for the playoffs. Like the playoffs have to be the goal this year. You got your, hey, scholarship year last year. They do need to make some moves. They do need to sign some defensive talent. I do want to make it clear though that just because a guy is getting paid $20 million in a year does not, or is getting a $20 million APY, does not mean that's what his cap numbers are going to be. So the cap number and a salary are two completely separate things. So, I mean, which we'll go into in a future podcast just because that's a lot of worms to uncan. But what I would say is, like, I think they're going to focus heavily on defense. My concern is, Dave, we know you are focused on the offense. How much are you willing to tether over to the defense from a financial perspective, from a focus perspective? Because you've got 4 free agent safeties, you've got 1 free agent starting corner, you have 2 outside linebackers who are more rotational starters, you've got an inside linebacker coming off of a shoulder surgery, you've got your longest tenured defensive player about to hit free agency. You've got a defensive end who's coming off of basically missing the entire season after surgery. Your nose tackle has underperformed for 2 straight years. Like there's a lot going on defense that they need to adjust and not a lot of cap space to do it. They do have a healthy number of draft picks. I believe it's 9. And look, I think, I mean, they're going to come at it strategically. I think Brent Tillis has done a really nice job of understanding the momentum of the salary cap. And I think that Dan Morgan has a good eye for talent. They're just going to have to deliver here because fans should have the expectation that they are going to make the playoffs. This is the NFC South. It's not the NFC North. It's not the NFC East. This should be an opportunity, especially with 7 seeds, for them to make the playoffs. I'm not saying that the division should be in hand, but they should be competing for a playoff spot when we get into the nitty gritty of December and January. That is a natural progression. They got their patience here. Now it's time to kind of enact some urgency.
Wow.
And I think when you see the way that teams like Minnesota and Washington have turned around so quickly over the last few years, when you look at the way that teams have consistently won in a league that you're not supposed to consistently win in, I think you can't get lost in the plot, and you've got to make some serious strides. It's cool to be kumbaya and be like, oh, cool. Well, now they're 7-11. Or 7-10. I mean, this fan base has heard for years to, chill. It's coming. And I think the way that Houston and Washington have exceeded expectations over the past 2 years, respectfully, puts a lot of pressure on this organization. Fair or not, that's just the way the NFL is. It's a go to the bathroom or get off the pot sort of what have you done for me lately league. That said, they have a lot of work to do, and there are going to be a lot of growing pains, and, they feel good about the quarterback position. They do. Everybody I've talked to feels really good about it. As they enter the draft, they've really got to hope that the strength of this class, which is defensive front, really plays in their favor, and I think that's going to be something interesting to learn from Dave.
100%. I mean, it's just kind of wild, though. Like, Mike Kaye is saying they should be competing for a playoff spot, or at least that should be the expectation.
That should be the I think they're going to. I mean, there's no way of knowing.
Right.
6 to 7 of their starting defensive positions are up up in the air, right? But like, I'd been here for 3 years. This is the first time I'm not covering a coaching search or then there's some sort of continuity. It's Bryce Young's third year. This is a big year for him. He's the guy this year, but in order for him to be the guy moving forward, they have to take a substantial jump with him behind the driver's seat. They've paid Chuba Hubbard. They've seemingly fixed this offensive line for the most part. Like people are right to be impatient at this point. Like, I'm not saying, this team should, but if if they finish the season 9-8 and just barely miss the playoffs, like, then it's a conversation, but like, they should be in the thick of it. This should, like, the last 3 years, the season's essentially been over from a playoff perspective by week 5. Mm-hmm. That can't happen this year.
Mm-mm.
And I think internally they're going to be aggressive but smart, which has been their motto. And I think they've been very literal with that. The bar was set low last year. There were no expectations. And, if you're somebody who's like playoff or bust, I don't blame you. You've been told to be patient for a very long time. Now's the time to enact. They more than doubled their win total from the year prior. Now it's time to kind of, play where the big boys play. And they're going to be under the fire to do that.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. That wasn't necessarily like a run through your wall, like, let's go kind of moment from Mike Kaye, but that was more optimistic than I'm used to from you. So that's great.
Well, this isn't me saying that there's
not even optimism. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to use that word.
I just like at some point you've got to deliver on promises and not necessarily promises made verbally, but like the promise of being a substantially improved organization. And I think I'm really interested to hear what Dave says from a an overarching thought process. Everybody can say the goal is to win the division. Well, say it like you mean it. Say it with your chest. Know that I want to feel that they know that they can compete, because this division is god awful. The Saints are dealing with salary cap hell. The Buccaneers have just lost their second offensive coordinator in as many years.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like Todd Bowles is constantly coaching for his job. The Falcons need to figure out how to control a game. From a clock perspective and a time management perspective. Like, it's open. This division's open every single year, and the Panthers can't constantly finish in that bottom half of the division. It's just not like, you want people to care. You want people to be optimistic about this team. Well, now's the opportunity. I mean, it's wide open for you. The offensive line and the defensive line if the trenches are improved, you have the ability to compete. And if you believe in Bryce Young and Bryce Young's that guy, go for it. I mean, that doesn't mean trade assets for notable names.
Right.
I mean, you have to focus on every timeline. You have to do what's right to the franchise. But the progression of the guys that are here, the continuity of having the base that they have created, go do something. Like, that's the thing. Like, I another 5-win season or a 7-win season is not going to cut it, I think, for this fan base. And I understand that. Objectively, they should be better this year. Will they be? We'll see.
We shall see. Mike, good stuff. Thanks, as always, for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach, who was making us laugh in the comments of this podcast. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
I'll do my best. That's a wrap, Zach.